My name is Sophia, and I am 25 years old. If you've heard the first part of my story, you already know that I married my female CEO boss, a woman who, to me, was the perfect combination of elegance, intelligence, and strength. What you might not know is how quickly and beautifully it all unfolded, how it felt to fall into something that felt too good to be real, and how those first months together became the softest chapters of my life. Our wedding was not grand in the way you might see in magazines, but it was perfect in its own way. We stood in a quiet garden under strings of warm lights, the faint sound of music in the background, and her eyes locked on mine like I was the only person in the world worth looking at. I still remember the way her hands trembled slightly when she slipped the ring onto my finger, and how she whispered, "You're safe with me always," before kissing me as the guests applauded. I believed her with every beat of my heart. Those first few months felt like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. Every morning, she would wake up earlier than me just so she could make coffee and bring it to the bedroom. The rich aroma would fill the air, and she'd set the cup down on my side of the bed before leaning over to kiss my forehead. "Rise and shine, Mrs. CEO's wife," she'd tease, and I'd laugh, pretending to be annoyed while secretly loving the sound of it. In the office, we kept things professional in front of others, but we had 1,000 little ways of communicating that no one else could notice. Her eyes meeting mine across the conference table, the slight curve of her lips when I said something witty, the light brush of her hand against mine when she passed me a file. Those moments kept me going through long hours and endless meetings, reminding me that behind all the corporate walls, there was a love story quietly blooming between us. We were good together. Better than good, we were effortless. She had this way of making me feel not just loved but valued, as if my presence added meaning to her world. At night, we'd cook together in our small but cozy kitchen, the air filled with the smell of garlic and butter, music playing softly in the background. Sometimes, in the middle of stirring a pot or chopping vegetables, she'd pull me into her arms, swaying with me like we were dancing to a song only we could hear. Even on busy days, she never forgot the little things, sending me messages like, "Thinking of you," or leaving a sticky note on my desk with a doodled heart. I'd catch her staring at me sometimes, and when I asked what she was looking at, she'd simply smile and say, "Just my favorite view." I thought that kind of love lasted forever. But sometimes, the universe has a strange way of planting shadows even in the brightest light. Every so often, a name would come up in her conversations with colleagues. She never said it with any special tone, but I noticed how her eyes shifted slightly when she mentioned it, as if it belonged to a memory that only she could see. I never asked who it was. Back then, I told myself it didn't matter. One evening, over a quiet dinner, she told me about a girl she had once admired, years before we met. She described her as someone from a completely different world, beautiful, confident, and belonging to a family of influence and wealth. She was untouchable, my wife said with a small laugh, shaking her head as if brushing away a harmless thought. I remember smiling, teasing her about old crushes, never imagining that the mention of that girl would matter in the future. I carried that moment with me, not because I felt threatened, but because it made me curious. I thought it was just another story from her past, one that had no place in the life we were building together. I never guessed that life had a way of making the past walk right into your present, and sometimes, into the space between you and the person you love most. If only I had known then how much weight that memory would carry. If only I had known that the girl she once admired was not as far away from us as I believed. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when she walked into our office for the first time. The air seemed to shift with her arrival, one of those subtle changes you can't quite explain but feel in your bones. She was tall, with a presence that drew eyes without her even trying. Her hair fell in smooth, dark waves down her back, her skin glowed as if kissed by the sun, and her smile was the kind that hinted at both sweetness and a touch of mystery. Someone whispered near my desk, "That's the new hire. She's the daughter of you-know-who." The name meant little to me, but the reverence in their tone made me glance again. Later, I would learn her father was a man of immense wealth, one whose name was woven into the fabric of business circles like ours. My boss, my wife, was the one to show her around that day. I watched from a distance as she introduced her to the staff, guiding her from department to department, her hand resting lightly on the small of the girl's back as they walked. It was a perfectly professional gesture. At least, that's what I told myself. But even from across the room, I could see how relaxed they were with each other, how easily they laughed. Over the next few days, she seemed to fit in seamlessly, as though the office had been waiting for her. She was charming in a way that didn't feel forced, complimenting someone's work here, asking genuine questions there. People warmed to her quickly, and I tried to be one of them. I told myself there was no reason not to. Still, I noticed things. Little things. Like how my boss's voice softened ever so slightly when she spoke to her, the way her eyes lingered a beat longer than necessary. When the new girl made a joke, my wife laughed. Not the polite, quick chuckle she usually gave colleagues, but that deep, genuine laugh I thought she saved for me. I pushed the thought away, telling myself I was reading too much into it. We'd built a life together on trust. I couldn't let a flicker of insecurity ruin that. And yet, when I walked into the break room one afternoon and saw my boss leaning against the counter, her body angled toward the girl, smiling in that familiar, soft way, I felt something tighten in my chest. "Hey," I said lightly, pretending not to notice how quickly they stepped apart. "Hey love," my boss replied, her tone warm but her attention still half on the girl, who offered me a polite nod and a practiced smile. They talked about a project they were working on together, and I stood there, feeling like an outsider in a conversation that should have been mine to join. When I finally excused myself, my boss caught my hand for a moment. "Everything okay?" she asked, eyes searching mine. I smiled and nodded, brushing it off. "Of course. Just busy." But inside, I wasn't sure. As the weeks went on, I saw them together often, sometimes in meetings, sometimes walking back from lunch. Once, I passed by her office and found the girl perched on the edge of her desk, laughing at something on my boss's phone. They didn't notice me standing there for a moment, and when they did, my boss's smile faltered for just a second before she greeted me. That tiny flicker of discomfort spoke louder than words. I tried to remind myself of the woman I married, the one who had promised I was safe with her, the one who held my heart with care. Surely a friendship with a new colleague couldn't erase that. But I also knew my wife's history, and somewhere in the back of my mind, the story she had told me months ago about the girl she once admired began to resurface. The pieces didn't quite connect yet, but the edges were starting to line up in a way that made my stomach twist. For now, I stayed silent. I told myself there was nothing to worry about, that the unease I felt was just a shadow passing over an otherwise sunny sky. But deep down, I could sense the weather changing. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for the storm. It started as small shifts, barely noticeable at first, like the slow dimming of light in a room you didn't realize was getting darker. Long lunches became a pattern. I'd glance at the clock around noon and notice my boss's office empty, her chair pushed neatly under the desk. When I asked her later, she'd say she had been catching up with the new hire about work, but the glow in her cheeks and the softness in her voice didn't sound like the aftermath of a business discussion. Then came the late nights. She used to make a point of coming home at a decent hour, even if it meant bringing work with her. But now, she stayed at the office long after most people had left. Sometimes she claimed she was buried in paperwork. Other times she said she was meeting with clients. I didn't want to accuse her of anything, but my mind was no longer at peace. It wasn't just at work. At home, her presence began to feel like a ghost of what it used to be. The easy warmth between us turned into polite exchanges, our laughter replaced by strained small talk. The messages she used to send during the day stopped coming. Even in meetings where our silent language had once thrived, a glance, a smirk, a quick exchange of knowing eyes, there was now a wall. She avoided my gaze entirely, as though looking at me might reveal something she didn't want me to see. One evening, I decided to make dinner for us. It had been weeks since we'd shared a proper meal together, and I thought maybe a quiet night at home could help us find our way back. I set the table with candles, cooked her favorite pasta, and poured a bottle of red wine we had been saving. By 7, she still wasn't home. I told myself she was just caught in traffic. By 8, I called her, no answer. By 9, the food was cold, and the candles had burned halfway down. I sat at the table, staring at the empty chair across from me, feeling foolish for believing that a plate of pasta could fix whatever was breaking between us. When she finally walked through the door at almost 10, she was smiling faintly, as if she'd just come from somewhere pleasant. Her hair was slightly messy, and there was a faint trace of perfume in the air. A scent I didn't wear, soft and floral with a sweetness that lingered. My heart sank. "You're late," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "I know, I'm sorry," she replied, shrugging off her coat. "Things ran late at work." "At work?" I asked, my voice just a little sharper than I intended. She paused for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Yes, at work." I wanted to press her, to ask why she smelled like someone else's perfume, why she hadn't called, why the version of her I knew seemed to be slipping away piece by piece. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I forced a small smile and said, "Dinner's in the kitchen. It's cold now, but I can reheat it." She hesitated, glancing toward the table before shaking her head. "I'm not really hungry. I ate earlier." The knife twisted deeper. I didn't have to ask who she had eaten with. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while she showered. I could hear the water running, the soft hum of her voice as she sang to herself, a sound that used to make me feel at home, but now felt foreign. In my head, I replayed every little change. The late nights. The long lunches. The laughter I no longer shared. The perfume. The way she looked at the new girl as if she were sunlight itself. A part of me wanted to get up, walk into the bathroom, and tell her exactly what I was thinking, that I knew something was happening, that I could feel it in my bones. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, still wanted to believe we could fix this, held me back. What if I was wrong? What if it was all just in my head, and confronting her would only push her further away? I had seen how quickly love could turn into resentment when trust was replaced by suspicion. I didn't want to become the jealous wife, the one who choked the air out of the relationship with accusations. So I stayed silent. I told myself that if I just waited, if I gave her space, she might come back to me on her own. But lying there in the dark, with her turned away from me in bed and the faint scent of that unfamiliar perfume still clinging to the air, I wondered if she already had. Days turned into weeks, and the coldness between us stopped feeling like a temporary chill. It became the climate we lived in. The small rituals that once tied us together quietly vanished. She no longer made coffee for me in the mornings. We no longer cooked side by side in the evenings. Even the casual, meaningless touches, the hand on my waist as she passed by, the quick kiss on my cheek before leaving for work, had disappeared without notice. The silence between us had grown thick enough to feel. We moved around each other like polite strangers sharing the same apartment. Her side of the bed stayed occupied, but her heart felt absent, as if it had packed its bags long before she ever would. One afternoon, I was leaving the office when a colleague stopped me by the elevator. "I saw your wife at that little cafe down the street yesterday," she said casually. She was with the new girl. They looked like they were having such a good time, laughing, leaning in close. You'd think they were a couple. She laughed lightly, not realizing the weight of her words. I forced a smile. "Oh, they must have been discussing work," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. Inside, something broke. I imagined them sitting together, her leaning in with that familiar softness in her eyes, the new girl smiling the way I used to make her smile. It wasn't hard to picture, and that made it hurt all the more. That night, I sat in our living room long after she had gone to bed. I didn't cry at first, I just stared at nothing, numb, as if my body refused to let my mind feel the full weight of what I already knew. But when I finally let go, it came in waves, silent, gut-deep sobs that left me gasping for breath. I pressed my face into the throw pillow so she wouldn't hear me, even though part of me knew she wouldn't ask what was wrong if she did. I remembered how she used to hold me on nights when life felt too heavy. How she'd wrap her arms around me and whisper, "I've got you." The memory was so vivid that for a moment, I could almost feel her arms around me again, until reality reminded me that she was only a few feet away, sleeping soundly in the next room, completely unaware of how alone I felt. Over the next few days, I started noticing changes I hadn't before, or maybe I had, but didn't want to acknowledge. Her phone, once left carelessly on the counter or coffee table, now never left her side. And there was a new lock screen password, something she'd never bothered with before. One evening, she sat at the kitchen island with her phone tilted just enough so I couldn't see the screen. Her thumbs moved quickly, her lips curved in a faint smile she didn't share with me. When I walked in, she glanced up and casually turned the phone face down. "Who are you texting?" I asked lightly, though my chest was tight. Just work stuff, she replied without looking at me, her tone too casual, too rehearsed. Work stuff didn't make her smile like that. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But I could feel the truth pulsing beneath the surface, like a wound I couldn't stop pressing. I didn't have proof. Not the kind you could show someone anyway. No photos, no explicit messages, no confession. But my heart already knew. It knew in the way her voice sounded when she talked to the new girl. It knew in the way her eyes lit up for someone else while dimming for me. It knew in the way she had slowly, quietly removed herself from the life we had built, brick by brick, until I was left standing alone in the ruins. At night, I lay awake staring at her back, wondering if she lay there thinking of me at all, or if she was replaying moments with someone else. The ache was constant, dull, like a bruise that never healed. And yet, I stayed silent. Because sometimes silence feels safer than hearing the truth you already know. It happened on a Friday night, the kind of night I had once looked forward to, when the week's exhaustion would melt away over a shared meal or a quiet movie on the couch. But that night, she didn't come home. At first, I told myself she was just working late again. I even tried to be understanding, convincing myself that maybe there was a last-minute deadline or some unavoidable crisis. But as the hours passed and my calls went unanswered, my patience began to fray. The house was too quiet. I sat in the living room with only the ticking clock for company. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound seemed louder than the last, the space between them stretching into something unbearable. I checked my phone over and over, the empty screen almost mocking me. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. By midnight, the worry had turned into something darker, resentment, fear, and a hollow ache that made my hands tremble. I thought about driving to the office, but some part of me knew I wouldn't find her there. The truth was, I didn't know where she was, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. I stayed up all night. I didn't even bother turning on the TV to distract myself. I just sat in the dim light of the lamp, watching the shadows shift as the hours crawled by. My eyes burned, but I couldn't close them, not until I saw her walk through that door. She came home at 7 in the morning, looking normal. No rush in her step, no panic in her eyes, just calm. "Morning," she said, setting her bag down like she hadn't been gone for over 24 hours. I stood there, my exhaustion turning into something sharp. "Where were you?" "Work emergency," she replied, her tone clipped but casual, as if that explained everything. "An emergency that kept you from calling? From texting me?" My voice cracked despite my effort to keep it steady. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine for just a second before she looked away, heading toward the bedroom. I didn't have time to explain. I was busy. I followed her, my anger breaking through the dam I'd been holding for weeks. Busy enough to stay out all night without a word? Do you have any idea what that felt like for me? She stopped mid-step, turning to face me. Instead of guilt, I saw something I didn't expect, annoyance. "Sophia, I can't drop everything to give you a play-by-play of my night. I have a company to run. Not everything is about you." Her words hit me harder than I thought they would. Not because they were cruel, but because of the finality in her tone. This wasn't the woman who used to hold my face in her hands and tell me I was her safe place. This wasn't the woman who used to put my feelings first, who would have driven across town just to bring me soup when I was sick. Something inside me went quiet. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just stood there, looking at her like I was seeing a stranger for the first time. "If you're no longer happy with me," I said slowly, "then say so. Don't make me sit here night after night wondering where you are, wondering if I've already lost you." She didn't respond right away. And in that silence, I got my answer. I felt it, the shift from hope to acceptance, from fighting to letting go. Because in that moment, I understood that the person I loved wasn't standing in front of me anymore. She was somewhere else entirely, and I couldn't bring her back. I walked past her and into the living room, my body moving on autopilot. "I won't hold you here if you don't want to be here," I said over my shoulder. "If she's the one you want, then go to her. But don't keep me chained to something that doesn't exist anymore." She didn't deny it. She didn't even ask who I meant. And that silence was louder than any confession could have been. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay. I woke up the next morning feeling strangely clear-headed, as if the exhaustion and pain from the night before had burned away something heavy inside me. The hurt was still there. It would be for a long time, but the desperation was gone. In its place was a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, scrolling on her phone, a mug of coffee in her hand. She looked up briefly. "Morning." "Morning," I replied, my voice steady. I sat down at the table and let a moment of silence pass between us before I spoke again. "The transfer of the company's ownership, it's all finalized now, right?" Her brow furrowed slightly. "Yes. Why?" I took a deep breath. "Then you don't need me anymore." Her eyes snapped to mine. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about us," I said quietly. "When we started, we were in this together, in love, in life, in business. But that's not true anymore, is it? You have your company secured, and you have her." She set her mug down, her expression hardening. "Sophia." "No," I said, holding up a hand. "Please. Let me finish. I'm not going to beg you to love me again. I'm not going to fight for a place in your life if you've already given it to someone else. So I'm telling you. You can be happy with her and let me go." The words came out smoother than I expected, but they felt heavy as they landed between us. She didn't speak right away. For a second, I thought maybe she would deny it, maybe she would say I was wrong, maybe she would tell me I was still the only one. But she didn't. She just stared at me, her mouth opening slightly before closing again, as if she couldn't decide what to say, or didn't want to say it. And that silence, that was my answer. I stood and walked toward the bedroom. She followed me halfway, stopping in the doorway as I pulled out a small suitcase from under the bed. I didn't pack much, just the essentials, clothes for a few days, my journal, and the framed photo of us from our wedding day. Not because I wanted to keep it close, but because I couldn't bear to leave it behind for her to forget. She watched me, leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed. "So that's it?" she asked finally. "That's it," I said, folding one last sweater and zipping the bag. "You made your choice a while ago. I'm just making mine now." Her face was unreadable, but there was no trace of panic, no desperate plea for me to stay. And as much as that hurt, it also made it easier. I wheeled the suitcase to the front door. She didn't follow. I slipped on my coat, took one last look at the apartment we had called home, the kitchen where we once danced, the couch where we spent lazy Sundays, the bed that no longer felt like ours. All of it was now just furniture and walls. I opened the door, the cool air from the hallway brushing against my face. "Goodbye," I said softly, not looking back. And then I stepped out, closing the door behind me. The sound of it clicking shut was quieter than I expected. But maybe that was fitting. Some endings don't come with slamming doors or shouting matches. Some just close softly, leaving you standing on the other side with nothing but the sound of your own footsteps moving away. It had been a week since I closed the door on the life I had built with her. 7 days of waking up in a quiet apartment that smelled only of my own shampoo, of making coffee for one, of avoiding the temptation to check her social media or call just to hear her voice. I told myself that distance was medicine. Bitter, yes, but necessary to heal. One rainy afternoon, I met up with a trusted coworker, someone who had been at the company longer than both of us. We sat by the window of a small cafe, steam curling from our cups. She hesitated at first, fingers tapping the ceramic, before finally saying, "Sophia, there's something I think you should know. I didn't want to tell you before, but now, maybe it's better you hear it." Her voice softened, but the weight in her words was like a slow, cold tide creeping over my skin. The rich man's daughter, the one whose laugh had started echoing in the halls where mine used to, had been in my boss's life long before I came along. She wasn't just an old acquaintance. She had pursued her once, persistently, but my boss had turned her away back then. It wasn't love that had pulled her back into the office, it was timing. Timing and opportunity. She only came back when she heard about the company transfer, my coworker continued, her eyes full of reluctant pity. "I think she wanted what you both had built, and maybe more than just the company." I felt something in me tighten, like a thread pulled to its breaking point. The betrayal I'd been carrying for weeks suddenly had a different shape, sharper, colder. It wasn't just that I had lost her love, I might have been a step in someone else's carefully drawn plan. I was the bridge that made it possible for her to cross into my boss's life again. The rain outside blurred the streets into soft gray shapes. I stared at them, wondering if my boss knew, or if she had simply let herself be swayed by an old flame wrapped in silk and strategy. It didn't matter anymore. Whether it was love, manipulation, or both, I was no longer part of that equation. I left the cafe without anger, without plotting some elaborate revenge. My dignity was the one thing untouched in all of this, and I wasn't about to hand it over. The truth hurt, yes, but it also set me free. I walked through the drizzle with my head high, letting the rain hide the tears I didn't need to explain to anyone. Some endings aren't loud. They don't slam doors or shatter glass. Sometimes, they're just the quiet sound of footsteps moving steadily away. The days turned into weeks, and the sharp sting of betrayal dulled into something quieter. Not gone but softened, like an old scar you still notice when the light hits it just right. I stopped replaying every moment we'd shared. I stopped asking what if. Instead, I began waking up with different questions. Not about her, but about me. Where had I been holding back in my own life? What parts of myself had I left on pause while loving her? Love can be real and still end painfully. That was the truth I had been resisting, but now it sat with me like an old friend, steady and undeniable. People change. Hearts drift. Sometimes, the person you thought would be your forever becomes only a chapter that mattered, but a chapter nonetheless. So I started writing my next one. I booked a ticket to Lisbon, no careful planning, no waiting for the right time. I wanted to see places that had no memories of her, streets where my name meant nothing, where I could be just another stranger passing through. Traveling alone was both terrifying and exhilarating. I wandered through narrow, sunlit alleys, tasted pastries so sweet they almost made me forget everything, and watched the ocean crash against the cliffs as if it were trying to tell me something only the waves understood. In cafes, I met other travelers, artists, students, retirees chasing the summer across continents. We exchanged stories like postcards, brief but vivid. I learned that you can feel connected to someone even if you never see them again. One evening, in a small hostel room scented with lavender from the garden outside, I pulled out my journal. The pages had been silent for too long, but the words came easily this time. She touched more than my heart, she touched my soul. And even though she broke it, I'm still here, still beating. I paused, reading it back to myself, letting the truth of it settle. The ache was still there, but so was something else, something stronger. I realized that heartbreak doesn't erase who you were before it, and it doesn't erase the beauty of what was real, even if it ended. Weeks later, I found myself standing barefoot on a beach just before sunset. The air smelled of salt and something ancient, as if the ocean had been holding secrets for centuries. The tide crept in slowly, cool water curling around my ankles, pulling back, returning again. I stood there, breathing with it, letting the rhythm of the waves match the rhythm of my heart. The water caught the last light of the day, scattering it across the surface like gold dust. I didn't cry, not exactly, but my eyes stung, and when the tears did come, they slid down silently, joining the sea without a trace. The tide didn't judge. It didn't ask why. It just took what I gave it, as if it knew how to carry pain away. The horizon was fading into shades of peach and deep blue, the kind of beauty that made you feel small and infinite at the same time. Somewhere behind me was everything I had lost. Somewhere ahead was everything I had yet to find. I turned away from the water eventually, the sound of the waves following me as I walked back up the shore. My footprints trailed behind me until the sea reached for them, one by one, and washed them away. Not erasing. Just making space for something new.